Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the show that talks about recovery, Recoveries R US. My name is Connie Pacheco. I'm the owner and president of Recoveries R US, and I'll be your host for today. Today, in our segment, I have a wonderful show for you today. Today, I have a young lady, Madison Porcio. Madison, welcome to the show.
Thank you
we
so
met
much.
Recently at a mental health, the LGBT
Task force.
task force, right? And Madison was on the panel, and I just had to get you on the show because your story is so unique. So Madison Porcio is the principal law clerk to the Bronx County Surrogate. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay, and so Madison, you chair the Queens County Women's Bar Association Mental Health and Wellness Committee.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how you started that?
It's a committee that we started 2 years ago, and we provide different programs and CLEs on mental health and mental wellness for members of the organization, so female attorneys. The organization itself is built to really emphasize helping women in the profession, and it's a chapter of the Women's Bar Association of the state of New York. There's also a chapter here in the Bronx. And the Wellness Committee is just about providing resources to our members about general mental health and wellness. Being a lawyer or a judge can be a very stressful position, so we want to make sure that we're, especially as women, as we're taking care of those around us, we're also sure to take care of ourselves. So we do programs in May.
Now, you said the service is CLE? Did I hear you
It's
right?
continuing legal education. It's a requirement for attorneys to do a certain amount of CLE credits.
Right.
So we provide educational material, and in going to those events, the attorneys receive CLE credits.
Right. It's just like us. We have CEUs, continuing education units for social workers and so on.
Precisely.
So that's what they call it for
Yes.
lawyers. Oh, I learned something new today. Wonderful. So you also found that you're co-chair for the Women's Bar Association in the State of New York Committee of Mental Health and Wellness. Is that the same or is that different? What's the difference?
It's the same committee at the state level. So I chair both the Queens Chapter Committee and I co-chair the committee at the state level. So we do a lot of things similarly, and then the Women's Bar Association will also take a stance on legislation that gets proposed or different, studies that pass through the office.
Right.
So.
Okay, so I know you author a letter, and this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to this. Madison authored a letter to the New York State Bar on behalf of the Women's Bar Association, supporting a measure removing a question on the New York State Bar application. And I know that that's very important. If any of you guys out there watching are going to take your bar exam, that's how they call it, right?
Yes.
This is something good to know. So it's asking applicants. So the application is asking applicants to disclose whether or not they sought mental health,
whether or not they sought treatment or were diagnosed with any sort of mental health disorder. And the state bar as a whole, not just the women's state bar, but the state bar as a whole conducted a study on the effectiveness of the question. It's question 34 on the exam, on its consistency on its application throughout the state, on its legality. And the study found that under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was likely to be found illegal. This wasn't a trial, so the findings are just research.
Right.
But also that if you answer the question in the affirmative, you can be asked to provide medical records about your diagnoses to be reviewed by non-medical professionals. And the study from the State Bar found that also was potentially a HIPAA violation. So after having read the study, the Women's Bar Association as a whole, our board of directors took a vote. We decided to take a stance on the issue and make it the policy that we don't support that question and that it should be removed from the bar exam. So we wrote a letter in support of the findings of that study in hope that the state bar will take that study to take an effort to remove that question from the New York State Bar exam.
Where do you guys stand with that now? How is that going?
The letter was just submitted this month. I believe that the State Bar meets at the beginning of the year. Might be the end of the year, but hopefully when they meet, that'll be on the agenda of things to move forward with.
So, and for those folks that don't understand all the legal jargon that we were just talking about, How important is that in terms of, is that a discriminating question on the application?
I believe it's discriminating, and what's really troublesome is the rates of suicide we've seen in law students,
Really?
especially recently. So I think that because that question is on the exam, the stress of law school can have a negative mental health effect on students, but they don't seek help because they don't want to have to answer that question. And so I think that it actually deters, and this was also in the study, that it can deter students who need help from seeking it. And I think that that's really, really important, especially as suicide prevention becomes such a forward topic. I was just at the United Nations for Mental World Health Day, and that was a huge focus. So I think that in the legal community, that's also a focus.
Right, right. And you know, listening to you say that, it's just like in the military, the suicide rate in the military is like 22 a day. We had a guest on the show that was talking about that, and I didn't know that that was something in law students as well.
Yes,
Wow.
unfortunately.
Yes, yes, unfortunately. Okay, so aside from many panels that you've moderated, I wanted to ask you about your own trials and tribulations.
Why do I do this?
Well, yeah, I did wanted to ask you first and foremost, why this particular law?
I got into surrogates court practice while I was still in law school. I had an internship in the Queens County Surrogates Court, and I really just fell in love with the substance of it. I always tell people it's kind of like falling in love when you find the area of law that you really are meant to practice. It's the last thing you expect to be doing, and it happens when you least expect it. But I love going to work every day. I love the substance of what I do. I love the people I work with, and it's a real treat.
Okay, so for our folks at home that don't know exactly what that particular law does, can you just spell that out for us?
So surrogates court is where you go when you're probating a will, somebody passes away, you need letters of administration, basically anything that you need after somebody passes away. So most people refer to it as probate court, but we handle much more than wills. A lot of people die, without having a will, so we have to handle those cases as well.
Perfect, wonderful. Okay, so Madison, question. How is it, or how did you come about in terms of your own trials and tribulations with your own mental health? I know that you disclosed that in the panel that you and I both met. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I did not know this until later in life, but I was first diagnosed with anxiety when I was 13. And I was prescribed medication, and my parents were very much against the stigma of it. At the time, without aging myself, there wasn't a lot of research as to what long-term effects there were to providing adolescents with antidepressants or benzos like Xanax and things like that. So my parents were very much against the idea, and it kind of just went untreated until about 3 years ago. I went through a really hard time in my life and had a lot of the struggles that I thought growing up that I didn't cope with well. I started really not coping with well and realizing that I couldn't cope with them and that I needed help. And so I sought help, and I learned about my prior diagnosis, and I learned that I have anxiety with my mild OCD, and I struggle with panic disorder and depression when I'm not handling the anxiety well. And for a few years, I was going to therapy and learning healthy coping mechanisms. And then I started to, as I got more involved with the Queens County Women's Bar Association, I started to see the women around me. And as I got more in control of my own, symptoms, I started to notice the symptoms of the people around me. And I thought, maybe this isn't a Madison issue. Right. Maybe this is a women's issue. Maybe this is a lawyer's issue. Maybe this isn't everybody's issue. Right. And we're just not talking about it. And I learned more about how stigmatizing this really is. And people are suffering and not talking about it. And I read statistics from the World Health Organization about how, the rates of suicide, and I just, my heart broke, and I took it to the Queens County Women's Bar, and I said, if we're an organization that's going to work toward the advancement of women, this is something that we need to encourage the conversation, and we need to learn more about this so that we can be helpful to one another. And I've been fortunate enough that it spiraled to the state level, and we've been able to hold these amazing panels. But it all started with my life fell apart, and I had to figure out how to get it back together. And I noticed people around me were having the same issues, and I wanted to help. I wanted to talk about it.
So let me ask you, I'm going to go back to when you were 13, because, and not that we're going to date you or ask you for your age. You're beautiful, and obviously you look so very young. How difficult, how did you manage? What were your coping mechanisms then, since your parents were so opposed of your medication?
I isolated myself a lot, and my brothers and sisters are much older than me, so I grew up as an only child. So I was used to being alone. I was bullied, not to a horrible extent. I grew up before social media, thank goodness. But so I was fine reading and being alone, but my emotional skills as far as relationships and being social weren't developed when I became an adult, because I had spent so much time alone. You know, I was mature for my age in the fact that I took school very seriously, but my ability to relate and be social with others was immature because I didn't have those relationships.
And Madison, I want to hear so much more about this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the thing about mental health issues and the recovery process. It doesn't discriminate. We'll be back after these few messages.
Suicide is death by self-directed violence with an intent to die. It's also preventable. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. This serious public health issue impacts the lives of individuals, families, and communities every day. More than 120 suicides occur in the United States each day. For every one suicide, there are an estimated 30 attempts. Suicide and non-fatal self-directed violence cost the U.S. more than $69 billion every year. People may be at risk for suicide if they have a family history of suicide, previous suicide attempts, social isolation, economic hardship, or a history of mental health problems or alcohol and substance abuse. Warning signs include talking about or threatening suicide, or actively looking for means to do so. Sudden changes in behavior or mood, especially following a painful event or loss, can also be warning signs. But the good news is that suicide is preventable. There are strategies that prevent suicide by reducing risks and increasing protective factors. You can help by strengthening access and delivery of suicide care, creating protective environments, promoting connectedness, teaching coping and problem-solving skills, identifying and supporting people at risk, lessening harms and preventing future risk, and by strengthening economic supports. Working together, we can prevent suicide.
Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me! Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Because of you, I felt hopeless.
Because you said rude things about my work, I started to question my own voice.
I know it was a joke, but it still hurt me.
Because of your negative comments online, I've almost quit doing the one thing that makes me happiest in life.
Because you shared something about me that was private, I felt embarrassed.
Because you said hi to me on the first day of school, I felt included, and I knew that I was going to be okay.
Because of you sharing your story with me, I feel comfortable sharing my own.
Because you were there when I was coming out, you helped me regain my confidence.
I'm still here today because of you.
back, everyone. Today we're here today with Madison. I'm so glad you guys are tuning back in. We're here with Madison Porcio, who is the principal law clerk to the Bronx County Surrogate. And we left off our conversation we went back to, you were talking about when you were 13 years old, how you were diagnosed with anxiety. And your parents were against medication, and we were talking about some of your coping skills, and you were talking about isolation, which is a very common thing for adolescents. Well, is it common? Yes, it's common for adolescents to isolate should they be going through something like what you went through. What are the coping mechanisms that you utilize during the course of your diagnosis at that early age?
Back then, I don't really think I knew how to cope, which is probably why I isolated myself so much. Having been in therapy at the time would have given me better tools. Having been in therapy now for over 3 years, I think there are a variety of healthy coping mechanisms that have allowed me to stay social and maintain my relationships. But I love to work out. You have to be careful about the substances you put in your body, and even down to sugar can be addictive. So, that's one way that I really try to monitor my symptoms. Spending time with friends, asking for help when I need it. A lot of people like meditation and yoga. I find it very difficult with an anxious mind, but you know that's a good one that I advocate for and that I've heard is very helpful for other people. So
we've had a lot of guests on the show talk about how meditation is so useful in dealing with anxiety. Madison, so so at 13, you're in you go to high school, you go to law school. Throughout this whole time, were you still not receiving services in terms of therapy and medication?
That's correct.
So you went through the whole process?
Until I was about 29. So about 15 years.
15 years. No medication, no therapy.
No, and I should have sought help sooner, and I wish that I would have. When I took the bar exam, I couldn't hold food down. I had panic attacks. My hair fell out. I knew something was wrong, and I just thought, once the exam is over, I'll be fine. And I should have known better.
And that's a lot of things that we always say that to ourselves. I should have, could have, would have. And when it comes down to mental health, and I always say that mental health, we all have a mind, whether it's healthy or not. That's the question. How healthy is it? And to listen to your story, having gone through this whole experience without medication, without any help. I was going to ask you what about family members or friends? Were they able to detect anything that anything was wrong?
I think that because I was so focused and so driven and so serious about my education and my career and the things that I wanted to accomplish, I think that it was probably mistaken for just part of my personality, just being type A and being that serious and taking things that seriously. To put it poorly, I was driving myself crazy. So in hindsight's 2020, I'm sure looking back, my parents say, yeah, we should have done more then. But I think it just was really stigmatized. Nobody talked about it and just assumed that's just the way I was.
Yeah, and I'm just listening to you and I'm thinking about all that time. That must have been horrendous for you to deal with that, the anxiety. Now, I think that you mentioned that you were also diagnosed with, you have another diagnosis?
Later
on,
yeah.
You were diagnosed.
And I thought, by the way, I thought all of this was normal. I thought everybody went through this.
Right.
So I didn't complain because I thought no one else is complaining about it. I really thought it was normal until I hit that break at 29 and sought help. So
tell me about that break that you...
I had 2016 was a tough year. I was married and divorced in the same year, and I went through a lot of feelings of disappointment and failure and guilt over a lot of poor decisions that I was making because I wasn't controlling my mental health. I lost a teenage cousin in the same year. It was too much to handle, and I didn't have the tools to understand my feelings and my own behaviors. And then when you add something so traumatic and feelings of such disappointment in yourself and judgment of yourself, the self-hatred is just horrible. And I finally said, I have to talk to somebody. This isn't normal. I finally realized the way I was acting, the choices I was making, what I was experiencing was not normal, and I needed help.
Where did you go? What did you do?
I went to a therapist. And I started talking, and after a few weeks, he was able to kind of identify the problem and give me some tools. And several months later, and I was going twice a week, 45 minutes twice a week. Several months later, about 6 months later, is when we first started talking about medication. So I had a full diagnosis and was in a treatment plan with my therapist before also adding a psychiatrist to my treatment plan.
Okay. And seeking therapy, how did you go about, how was that decision? I know that the decision was made after the episode that you had, but how do you research what kind of therapist you wanted to go to?
I went on ZocDoc.
Okay. What is ZocDoc? This is the
ZocDoc
first time I hear about.
It's an app, and you can put in your insurance.
So
and
Z-O?
Z-O-C-D-O-C.
C-O-C-D-O-C. You got that?
And you can put in dentist, psychologist, whatever, put in whatever insurance you have, and it'll pop right up, and you can do a search area. And I went to 2 or 3 different therapists, and my now therapist of over 3 years, Dr. Dustin Cahood, he said, this is like an interview, and I'm not interviewing you, you're interviewing me. And you need to feel comfortable with me, and you need to connect with me. And I just really liked that he was very different from my approach. He was much more laid back than I am. And sometimes I wish I have that inner voice that's more laid back.
Right. So am I to understand that you interviewed 3 different doctors before you made that one decision?
Yes.
And that's very important when we're looking. It's just like looking for any doctor, you know, a medical doctor. You don't like this doctor, you don't like the way he treats you, you're interviewing the doctor, you go and you find another one. Absolutely. That's so great that you mentioned that, because sometimes folks, they go to a behavioral health specialist and they feel that they have to just stay with this particular person.
Right.
And sometimes it's just about connection and chemistry. If it's not connecting and that you don't have that chemistry with that particular therapist, you find another one. ZocDoc. Did I say that
Yes,
right? I
ZocDoc.
love that, ZocDoc. That is so wonderful. So so now you're in therapy. You're taking this medication. How, and this is the recovery process now. How has this recovery process been for you?
Slow, but worth it. It's slow and steady. The last 3 years, I think I've learned more about myself than I ever knew. I've lost friendships and regained them. I've lost friendships that weren't serving me. I've gained friendships more responsibly. My mom tells me I matured 10 years in the first year. And I just was really able to connect with myself, and that gave me more clarity in connecting with others. And I learned healthy coping mechanisms, and especially in the last 2 years of getting involved in mental health advocacy, you know, I've been able to have these conversations and realize when somebody tells me I've made them realize they're not alone, it reminds me that I'm not alone. And it's as therapeutic for me as it is to the people that I'm talking to or potentially helping. And it's difficult to say it's all worth it, because, you know, you get to a bad place because you've made bad decisions, and it's hard to reconcile with hurting people. But sometimes, you know, it takes a dark tunnel to see the light at the end. And I'm at a point where I have the light at the end, and I'm happy in my own skin, and that's a first for me.
Yeah, and you know, at the health forum that we was at the other day, we were talking about the stigma about medication, and I want our viewers to know that how important it is. People think that because you're having a mental health issue and you're on medication, you can't work, you can't do certain things, you can't have a career, and you're a prime example that is not true. You know, you
Absolutely.
are just a shining star of, you know, having gone through episodes of or episodic situations in your life, and here you are today shining bright. And how important is therapy? You know, how important that is in
Don't ever
one's
take
life.
meds if you're not in therapy.
Right.
There's so many statistics about people who go to their general doctor and they say, oh, you must be depressed, and they just throw Lexapro or Xanax at the problem without any behavioral therapy to teach healthy coping mechanisms. And people end up using these really, really strong controlled substances irresponsibly. So therapy is number one, and the medication is definitely number 2.
Right, there has to be a combination, and you're so right. To our viewers out there, that is very important. If you are seeking therapy, or seeking to get on medication, if you need to, you have to couple that with behavioral therapy. You just can't take one of the. Sometimes folks you can do well with just behavioral therapy, and sometimes folks, just like Madison explained, may need to be on medication, and that's okay. It's just like any other disease.
If you were a diabetic, nobody would fire you because you took insulin. If you have a disease and you're taking care of it, you're being responsible.
That's right.
And it's the same for mental health.
That's right. That's right. So Madison, I have to thank you so much. I would. So my last question for you is, as we wrap this up, thank you so much for being here. Hope that you come back and visit us sometime.
Love to.
For our viewers, what would you like? What kind of? I mean, you've said so much, and you're definitely so inspiring. And I'm sure that a lot of people watching this tonight are going to pick up the phone and call us to find out more information. What would you like to tell our viewers?
Please do not be afraid to talk. Whether you need help, whether you see someone who needs help, get up in their business. If you see someone in crisis, ask them if they're okay, and don't take "I'm fine" for an answer. If you are in crisis, don't hold it in. There is no stigma or shame in talking about your feelings if you're not okay. Please, please, if you have to call me, if you have to call Connie, don't be quiet. Speak up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I wanted to tell our viewers, and coupled with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you yourself or you know someone who's struggling, who's grappling with either mental health issues, regardless of what it is, whether it's anxiety, depression, regardless of what it is, or the recovery process, we have recovery coaches standing by. Give us a call and we will send a recovery coach over to you to link you and help you with resources right there in your neighborhood, right here in the Bronx, that you can start doing something about it. It's just like Madison said, you have to ask for help. And I know that sometimes that's difficult for us to ask for help, especially when we're going through these difficult times, because we just feel like nobody can help us. But I just want you guys to know that there's always help. There's always a way out. Someone told me one time that to every problem, there's a solution. Wait, to every solution, there's a problem. They said it backwards, and I had to think about that for a minute. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Exactly. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, Madison, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I appreciate all the information that you gave us. I want to wish you well in your journey, in your endeavors, and continue to advocate and be, a mental health, what I call mental health warrior.
Yes.
And
I like that. I'm going to use that.
Yes, definitely. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. And always remember, you have to start somewhere, and it all starts with you.